Okay, this is our critical discourse 6.
Yeah.
And it's on the problems of a single story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and on white privilege. And I don't remember the
Peggy McIntosh.
Peggy McIntosh. Want to start us off?
Okay, so I'll go back to Tuesday when we watched the TED Talk that Mrs. Adichie did on the thing about stories. And she basically talked about her own experiences with stories, and then the implications of a single story, and stereotypes, and what stories can tell us about people and how they're used.
How did you feel about that?
I really enjoyed it. I thought that a lot of the things she was saying were very important, and I really liked the line. I said it in class, but I liked the quote when she said, a stereotype isn't bad because it's not true. It becomes bad when it becomes the only truth. So when you label people or stereotype them, it shouldn't necessarily be a bad thing because the stereotype might not necessarily be true, but because that's the only story you're giving them when they have many other stories, and then other stories might be more important than the stereotype that you're putting on them. So I really like that about what she was saying, and about I thought what she said was very interesting. I actually wrote some stuff down.
Yeah, I really like the fact that, everybody does have a story, and we need to really start looking into, everybody's different stories, and looking at people as just individuals, not as a different ethnicity or a different type of thing. It's just they're a human being with a different story, and those stories have, we should value those stories, and yeah.
And also when she talked about how the only books she had access to when she was little were books about white children who drank ginger beer and played in the snow. And I think that really tells us a lot about the information that we present to our kids as teachers, and how much of an impact that can have on them.
All that hidden curriculum that's in there that we don't know.
And what they take away from it. And I think it can go the same way opposite, because I remember the stories that I had when I was little about Africans. All of them were about them being on the savannah and the living with wild animals, and that's not how all people in Africa live.
Mm-hmm.
So then what she also said was, the consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes their recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. And I think that's also something. I don't think it's necessarily true. I mean, it's putting a lot of negative emphasis on a single story, when I think that even for some people, even just a single story is more than they would ever get anyways to tell people. Like, I want to tell you a story about myself, and that's the story they choose. So sometimes one story does hold a lot of meaning for people, but I think what she's trying to say is that you need to remember that people have more than one story, even if one story is all you're hearing.
Yeah, and I think I really like how she focused too on positive and negative stories. Like, it's really easy for us to pinpoint a negative story from Africa, like how they're poor and the poverty and they're starving and whatever. But like her roommate, it was, she's like, I had a really great upbringing where, I had great role models, and my parents totally told me I should write, and we do focus a lot on how we can help, and those kind of, like the white person coming in and helping out rather than, being the other
And
side.
also, I mean, something else that I really liked about that class was when Kathleen was talking about the two kids she nannies for, the girls from the Congo, and how her mom said that that's a really great opportunity for her to write a children's story for kids like the kids she nannies for.
Yeah.
That so they can have a story about someone in their context, so they can understand it and they can identify with it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was Tuesday, and then today we talked about the article White Privilege Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack.
And how there's so much hidden racism and hidden marginalization that goes on without us even knowing, and how we just have these unearned privileges or advantages over people just because of, like you said, we won the like the racial
Oh, you win the racial lottery.
Lottery.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to look at those things in our society because, yeah, like David said, if we don't acknowledge that they're happening and we don't think about them critically, then we are actively participating in being racist and in continuing to have a society that is racist and is white dominated.
Yeah. And I think that the other thing about white privilege is recognizing that feeling guilty about it isn't going to do anything. Because I think a lot of people struggle with that white guilt, because they're aware of it, and so it just becomes this cloud hanging over their head that's like, I'm white, so I get stuff, and I feel bad about it.
And I'm sorry.
And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for something I have no control over. So
I'm not doing anything about it. I'm just gonna say sorry.
Yeah.
Or feel guilty.
And
right?
it ties back to apologies, like that thing that we did on apologies, where it's like it's not about what you're saying, it's about what you're doing.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna talk about being white and having white privilege, that's great, but do something about it.
Yeah, and I actually just posted on my folios something from Brene Brown, and she talks about shame and guilt and how they're intertwined. But it's vulnerability that we need to talk. She talks a lot about vulnerability and how, we have this guilt and this shame once we see the wronging that we do, but it takes, and that's our vulnerability. That is our vulnerability, is our shame and our guilt, but it takes so much courage to admit that we've done that, and that's the only time, like, once we admit that we're doing that and take steps to get out of that, that takes pure courage, and then
it's like admitting, like what David was saying, but no one wants to say that they're racist. No one wants to be like, yeah, I'm racist, when
no one wants to say that they're wrong.
Yeah.
Like our government, what kind of government would we have if they were wrong?
Yeah. So I think that admitting and being aware of it and admitting that it's there, and then moving forward from there. I mean, I know I had a lot of questions when I was in South Africa for people who were working. Like, I worked on a farm with some people who weren't South African necessarily. They're from different parts of the world, and I was just interested if they found that working there, they felt like they were becoming more racist, because the stereotypes that placed on black people are really, I mean, that's where they come from. Like, black people who don't have an education, who don't, like, none of them owned farms or managed farms. They all just worked on farms. And so I was wondering if someone who's immersed in that community and that culture and unaware becomes more racist but not aware of it, because the stereotypes are perpetuated every day and they have to deal with that, and it's a reality for them. So,
and even just saying that they just work on a farm, like it's saying my dad is just a manager at Peerless Page, or I'm just a lifeguard. But I mean, that person that's working on the farm is really helping everybody that's above that person, right? So it's not just...
Yeah, but the reason, like, why, like, no black person, not no black person, but in none of the farms in the area, like, the farmers would not, like, if a black person was like, I want to open a farm and run a farm, that would not be that.
Well, like this one, she said when you ask to talk to a manager, I can expect the person to be of my same race. Yeah.
And I mean, South Africa is very different than our society. Like, it's very hard to compare, because that undercurrent of oppression is still so much there. But it is, I think it's a very visible and easy to identify examples of what we're talking about. I mean, I think Jane and I both, because we both traveled and stuff, as we've said before, are not more aware, but very aware of what we have and what we don't have, and why we have it and why we don't have it. And I think that it's just knowing and then doing something about it. Like Jane. Yeah.
Well, then, like I said, like I looked back at my experience of working in like doing my teaching abroad, and I'm sure you have too, and I kind of went over with that idea that, oh, I'm bringing, we fundraise $10,000 for them, and we're going to come in and we're going to get them medical aid, and then, which was wonderful. We did a wonderful thing there, but who was that for? That right there was for, yes, it helped them, but it was a lot for me, right?
Yeah.
And then I kind of started to look at it from a different angle, and I pulled myself out of my classrooms where I was like, what did they do for me? And I started to look at things like, well, when I was teaching in Africa, I didn't have electricity, and I didn't have the supplies on hand to teach. We were talking about dissolving and what does and doesn't dissolve in science. And so it taught me to be incredibly resourceful. Like little things that we don't look at, that they're teaching us, that we don't need these grandiose things to teach.
Yeah.
Something as simple as cow's milk and water and kerosene. You can show that, like you can. Anyways, I think with that, like with thinking and critically and with all of these things, we can look at it and see how everybody has, everybody's way of life is
something to offer.
Has something to offer.
Yeah.
And their opinions and their insight is something to value because
it's different from yours.
Yes.
It gives you different, and you should always be working.
And it could be more environmentally safe, or anyway.
Yeah. And a good an example that I thought of just now was, I don't know if you remember the Coney 2012 thing.
Yeah.
And how it was about a man, Coney, who was recruiting child soldiers in the Congo, I think it was. And so someone over here, some journalist, I think, started this whole movement and this campaign to raise money and raise awareness about this man and stop him from creating child soldiers. And in theory, it was incredible. I mean, it was a great idea. It's perpetuating, and then there's this thing called something the night, and it was supposed to be, they were targeting one night, and everyone was supposed to go paste this guy's name everywhere, so everyone in the morning, everyone would be asking who this guy is and what he's doing. And there was a huge backlash over it, and these huge debates back and forth. And when I saw the movie, because they put out a movie.
Explain the debate, why it was happening.
What do you mean? Oh, why, who? Yeah. But I wanted, my part in it, because I watched the movie and I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This is a way to help. This is a way to do something. And so many people jumped on it as something that they could do. And then the debates about it were who are you to go in and do this for these people when I don't really know how to say it. It was more kind of and then this other movie came out about this woman who also lived in the Congo, who was it's great that people know about it, but it's way better to help inside the country.
Yeah.
For people to do it themselves, for people in the Congo to be aware of it, and then to do something themselves. So help people help themselves versus just helping them. And that was a very clear example. And I think a thing that touched a lot of people here in the Western community, like that Coney 2012 thing. I know a lot of people jumped on it and wanted to do something with it and wanted to be a part of it. And I think for me, it was a really incredible lesson on thinking critically about problems in the world and thinking about when you want to help, who you're helping, and why you want to help.
And you know what also is a really good lesson on too? It's how willing people are to get together and fight for something. Fight for something that they believe in.
Yeah.
And I think that, it has to be looked on a big thing too, these things where they go and dance randomly in the mall, or what are they called?
Flash mobs.
Flash mobs. And and I think people are willing to do that kind of stuff. And I think it just takes that's the action, right?
Yeah.
There needs to be an action. And I see where you're coming from with yours. I do, and it makes a lot of sense. You do have to critically think about these things, what charity you're donating to, or where's that money actually going,
and et cetera, et cetera. But and I was really frustrated with people who were super negative about people who jumped on the Coney bandwagon, because I thought, because there was that thing, it was like, yeah, maybe they didn't think about it critically, but they saw something and they wanted to do something about it. And the thing about the very marketing thing about the Coney video was it presented it into you in a way that gave you something really easy, really simple to do, but that helps. Because I think a lot of people want to help, but they don't have the time, they don't have the motivation, they don't have the etc. But it kind of accessed the masses and gave them something to do. So I think that that's really important in terms of because I mean people complain all the time about no one helps, no one cares. But if you give people a way to do it, then I thought that was amazing about that movement. But I do think that in hindsight you do need to think more critically about it.
Mm-hmm. I was talking to Kevin about it, and he always says if this is the one fight, he says, well, someone has to make the decision. Something you have to put something out, and you have to. He's like, so if you sit there and think critically about everything all the time, when's anything actually going to get done, right? Yeah.
So at some point, it's going to move fast.
It's going to move fast, right? Yeah. So, anyway, but I do think I do really like the fact. Sorry, we'll finish up in just a little bit here. I do really like the fact that being ignorant is the worst thing we can do, because we are participating, even though we don't think we are participating. Yeah. So I think it's really important to think about that, because being ignorant about recycling, even when you're like, oh, I know this could be recyclable, but I don't see a recycling bin, or, just being, and just not thinking critically is probably our worst quality, it could be the worst. Yeah. And that's why it's important to teach our children that,
Yeah, and I think all of our critical discourses come kind of back down to being aware and thinking about it.
And thinking critically about
knowing about it and thinking critically about it. So that's something you really want to teach.
Yeah. Anyway, that's our critical discourse for this week.
It's supposed to be 5 minutes, and it's 17 minutes. Awesome.
Again.
Okay, have a good reading break.